Di Maria, Lionel Messi, Messi's hit! Oh! That's what they came for!
This could be the most dramatic story of the season. It's Torres to give Chelsea a place in the Champions League final.
Cheers, mate. And on the back of it, it's actually Kane. So a little bit of I saw you with your Spurs top on. I was 50-50 whether I was going to wear this or not. And I was like, oh, do you know what? I'll chuck it on now. Jordan's got his Spurs top on. So a bit of a Spurs influx tonight, I suppose. Just one's, better than the other.
Love that.
But at least you can come in this week, mate. At least saying that you've had a decent win in the league recently. So something that you can start off positively this week.
Yeah, very good performance on Sunday. I think we had United on ropes.
And I think that's good news, mate, because I think, some of the speculation before the game was whether both managers were under pressure. They're both looking for wins. And I think, Ten Hag is still struggling. And there's still an argument around, the players that he's brought in, the ones that he now wants. He's had the squad now for a few years. United can go out and find anyone better than him, so they've kept him. So I think the question will be whether he'll still remain at the end of this year, or whether they go, you know what, we're going to cut our ties at the end of this year, or whether they go through half the year. I think it all depends on what success they have, how they perform, especially within Europe, and how their Premier League games follow. So I think it's definitely an interesting time for United, because they've appointed Ruud Van Nistelrooy as an assistant first-team coach, and he went on and won the league with PSV. He's an experienced first-team manager, ex-United player. He has all the tick boxes to become interim or caretaker manager on that realm.
Yeah, I think it's leading in that direction, and it'll be a good experience for him to see where he is, especially managing the interim period with Manchester United. He knows it, the background scenario from playing there, but management's a different ball game completely, if you pardon for pun. Yeah, I think Ten Hag's under a lot of pressure. I was thinking only after the game on Sunday, if I was a United supporter, I'd be very stressed out with what I've witnessed after that performance.
And I think so as well, mate, because they're not in a great position. They're not performing well. That pressure's on them. They're still being talked about. They're still not playing the right, type of football, or being branded as understanding of people going, right, that's the way United play, because people still don't have a sense of what Ten Hag wants to do there. So I think it's still the same questions which are repeated year after year. And I think that's a little bit as a frustration, as well as, spectators like us, like the same questions still arising, but yet nothing seems to be improving for United. So as United fans out there, they must be so frustrated to be a fan at that period of time.
Absolutely, I think this is it. It made me laugh when Jamie Redknapp said, I think we watched a sport yesterday, saying that he feels sorry for Ten Hag in a sarcastic tone, only spending 616 million or whatever it was.
It's true, mate. It's true.
There's going to be a lot more pressure on Ten Hag because of that. But it's just, yeah, you're right. There's no identity with United. Always when you've gone to Old Trafford, you always used to be a bit fearful because of having the Old Trafford crowd behind you and everything like that. But it seems like you go there now and you can turn up and play your game and walk away with 3 points. It's not the theatre of dreams as it used to be, unfortunately. It's gone very downhill. And as Gary Neville said on commentary on Sunday as well, which is very true. I was watching it from stepping back again from a Spurs supporter point of view. He said, "Where's the pressing? It's a very disjointed press. There's not a collective press. There's not a team press. There's nothing about the team that is exciting." And I even question it to this day, though Gary Neville had that short spell in Valencia, would he do a better job than Ten Hag at the moment? He probably would.
Do you know what? I was actually looking at Gary Neville's record the other day, right? And his record at Valencia actually isn't too bad. It's not as bad as like some managers who have got years and years of experience behind them. I think he still has like something in the 40% win ratio, which actually isn't too bad when you look at it on paper. I think they went through a very bad run. He accumulated some big losses, and therefore people put that down as a big failure. But at the end of the day, when you look at the stats he's got in the 40% zone, he's actually not done too bad considering he's never had a job before. He never managed in the country. He's not Spanish. He was flown in on a short basis. So actually, in contrast, it's not that bad considering.
No, it's not. I think again, this is it. Is we as supporters though put pressure on players that have had a very good standing, a high pedigree of football, and we're expecting them to follow suit when it comes to coaching or management for that matter. But it doesn't work out like that, as we found out. Really, all right, Pep's probably an exception, um, but by and large, I mean, there's a lot of players that, sorry, a lot of managers that didn't cater the top flight of football, but they've turned out to be really good man managers and get the best out of their teams.
Well, some of the news this week was Ole Gunnar Solskjaer saying he would go back to United within a heartbeat. Do you think they'd consider him to come back?
I'm not sure, but then I look on it now and I think Ollie did a good job.
I agree.
I mean, there was a lot of stick. He was always getting stick one way or another, Ollie, unfortunately, but he's still got him fighting back up near for being in a title run, wasn't it? In one of the seasons. And I wouldn't think it's a bad shout, especially as Ronaldo's not there now. I think I heard Ollie say as well that he felt the other players didn't get loved so much because Ronaldo was there or something, vice versa, which was quite an interesting quote for him to say. But if he's learned from that, then yeah, I mean, it's again a scenario he knows, setup he knows for football club, and who knows? I mean, it might be a bit um, like, well, what have I come into if he was to get back into United straight away because of that pressure with new signings and so on and so forth. But yeah, I think that wouldn't be a bad idea for United.
I don't think it's too much of a bad shout considering I know people might say they're going backwards, they might not progress with the thought of Ollie coming back in. But at the end of the day, I think he sort of sits in that same category as Southgate. They both done okay jobs. There's a 50-50 split between those who said they've done good and those who said they haven't. But it'd be interesting to see whether they came into other jobs now, how they would perform. So whether Southgate would come into the Premier League where he'd get a team, how they perform, or whether he'd be like a Chris Coleman coming into Sunderland completely underperforming after, some successful international stints and then sort of not doing well at club football, or whether he would do okay. And it's the sort of same with Ollie. He has a lot of experience behind him. He's won some league titles. Okay, granted, they were abroad. Cardiff City didn't go very well. United's a bit of 50-50 on the fence for some fans. But I don't think it's a bad shout. And I think he'd be good to sort of come back and see how would he perform with another club and actually could he get them mid-table? How could he get them performing? Is he someone who could stabilise the club and has that potential to keep them there? And they're sort of managers which I'm interested in because they have a very good sort of background, a good CV, hasn't quite worked out maybe, or they've had some success but not defined success. And therefore, they're still sat on the fence and people don't know what to make of them. But yet we don't see them jumping back into jobs. And that's maybe because they only want particular jobs to try and bolster their record, or for people who are in that 50 camp of going, he's not a very good manager, that could actually become larger if they don't have success elsewhere. A bit like Chris Coleman in some sense. So yeah, I think they're interesting managers on a landscape when you consider that kind of realm and experience and managers not coming back into it and maybe why clubs don't consider them.
Absolutely. I think when you look at it though with United, realistically, who else could they really appoint at the moment that's out of work? I mean, Klopp wouldn't go there. If they want a big name, he wouldn't go there. Southgate, yeah, is he a contender, of course. But I just feel like I know it's still early on in the season, but why not give it the gig until the end of the season, Ollie? And then assess. And if it's turned out to be a really good, smart move, then it's something to move forward into the summer with a bit of stability. But I think this is it. I'm going to be. It could be a bit controversial, and I apologise if there's any United fans out there listening. But it is a bit of a circus there at the football club at the moment. It's not stable one bit, and if I paid X amount of money out for a season ticket, I'd want it renewed right now.
But I'm just on the consideration of that. I think it's very true, because as much as you label that a circus, it can be in a way. Because if you look at, that sort of potential of Ruud Van Nistelrooy being appointed the caretaker manager, right? You'd end up going from having Ryan Giggs as interim manager or caretaker manager at some point. Michael Carrick, I know Darren Fletcher was involved in running the side at some point. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, and then perhaps Ruud Van Nistelrooy. So they've had 6 ex-players who are potentially interim managers over the last 10 years, 12 years since Alex Ferguson's retired. I think that's quite a lot of former players to be taking charge of a club, and they still make appointments after them, and they're still not having success in between that. So I think it's critical they identify the next manager as the right move, even if they keep Ten Hag for another year, for example. But I think it's that list again, who is the right man to take over? And it sort of comes into that Liverpool space when they were looking to replace Klopp. Who is the right man? And Arne Slot seems to be someone who's doing a really good job at the moment. But you could throw a name out like Postecoglou, who's doing well at Spurs. Okay, he's still under jurisdiction for year 2. He's only got a year's experience behind it with Spurs. And people might go, do you know what? He's actually not an upgrade on Ten Hag. He's just going to keep us performing in the same way. Well, actually, then who do you start to look at? So it becomes a very difficult narrative when you want success and what success looks like and how United are going to achieve that next year. So I think it's very interesting times for United in terms of whether they're going to make a move, whether it's going to be interim manager, whether Ole returns, whether Ten Hag's going to be still in situ. So definitely a consideration on a lot of fronts for United.
Absolutely, and I think with Ten Hag's position at the moment, I feel he was very fortunate to keep his job after last summer. He only kept it, I swear, because they won the FA Cup.
I think so as well, mate. I think so.
Yeah, it's just, it's. I suppose you said you'd want to build on that, but I just can't see with Ten Hag. I don't know. It's just not working out, and I think maybe United's a bit of a too big a step up for Ten Hag. If he mastered it at Brighton or, any of these, like Villa even, where they are. I know they've got Unai Emery now, but at least you've set a tone for Premiership then. But at United's a big step up, and unfortunately, whoever was going to replace Fergie for years and years and years, it's going to be difficult because of the legacy that he left at the football club.
Absolutely, mate. And I know that Ten Hag was linked with Spurs at one point before he went to United. And it would have been one of those where you sort of look at Spurs as a step-up club to a United. But in reality, they still are. Until they achieve success and consistent and they're up there, they're still a stepping stone club, and especially for someone like United. So if Ten Hag had come into the Premier League, he'd done all right at Spurs for a few years, he challenged for cups, maybe won an FA Cup or something, got them into Europe, and then United said, you know what, there's a good internal manager, he's won leagues, we can take him from Spurs to come across, then actually that might have made a lot of sense. He's had success at Ajax, and again, a lot of people hold out going, right, but that's the only success he's had. Again, the Dutch league isn't as competitive, and then you sort of take him and he might go and do well out in Italy somewhere, for example, or he might do okay in Spain, or he might find another club, and people will go, right, it's actually because the Premier League's that competitive, other leagues are walks in the park. And I hate that sort of excuse, mate, and I really do, because they're not realistically though, and I'd love to see anyone else from off the street go in, take charge of that club for a year and try and replicate the success of your Brendan Rodgers at Celtic, get your Ten Hags at Ajax and so on. So I think it's realistic terms when it comes to those things. But again, interesting perspective of who's going to step in and who might be considered on that shortlist. It'd be very interesting to see who they've identified on the back of last year, whether they've got any people in mind and what those names are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one person that, is he out of work? I can't think now. But for sort of person that United should be going for is someone like a Zidane.
Out of work, I think that's such a great shout, mate. When you look at realistic terms, multiple Champions League winners manager, league wins as manager, fantastic win record. He'd have a good influx as French players. He links well with young players. He's managed superstar, world class. He's out of work at the moment. He'd be a big profile name who would fit in at United. So I think, again, he's someone who's been out of work for many years, but would still be a great shout to come in and take charge of United if they want to compete. Out of other names, if they don't want to go for your Postecoglou's, your Thomas Franks, your Ruben Almirons, and that sort of category, then who do you look for? And Sedan's a great shout. So I think that's a solid one, George.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's I just find it. I think United's just going backwards, and as a neutral, it is just sad to see because of, again, the history of United, and there's still huge potential at United as well to get it back on its feet. But it goes back to that phrase of they need to sort that circus out. They can't have too many clowns involved.
And I think that's it as well, mate. And I think part of it is you sort of consider it, right? And you might, again, be in this football manager reality, and we might be overthinking some things, right? Or we might be playing into some scenarios or make-believe world, right? But even if they consider someone like Postecoglou to go in and take over at United, who, again, I don't think is a bad shout, right? But they might be competing with England for a manager like Postecoglou. And therefore, if that does happen, right, if you had only internal candidates from the Premier League, excluding the top clubs, right, and you could take any manager in the league to replace Postecoglou at Spurs, who would it be?
Oof. Thomas Frank is the only one that really stands out to me.
I think that's a good shout.
I think Carroll's doing good stuff at Bournemouth as well. But I think, standout would be. Yeah, standout would be. I said, no, just a second ago. Mine's gone blank. Thomas Frank, yeah.
Thomas Frank, I think it's a good shout. Again, as we know, big fans of him, right, mate? But do you know someone who I would consider for that job who actually isn't a bad shout? Personally, I think he's not a bad shout. Kieran McKenna.
Very true. Yeah, young and up and coming. Achieved big things at Ipswich. I think I can see him doing all right with Spurs, but then I think with United even, that wouldn't be a bad shout. I mean, Chelsea was after him in the summer.
And that were they were the links, weren't they? Chelsea United in the summer for someone like Kieran McKenna. And again, I think that's why England are holding out a little bit, because they're sort of looking at Eddie Howe. I think they're looking at Graham Potter. I think they're obviously analysing Lee Carsley. And then I think they've got other managers underneath that, like Postecoglou, like maybe Klopp, like Thomas Frank, right? But then I also think they're considering a Kieran McKenna in another perspective of manager who could come in, who they might be able to identify and pinch as England manager if they can't get Pep Guardiola.
Yeah, I think Kieran McKenna's a solid chat, and I do think he's got, well, he's up and coming. It's exciting where his management career is going to curve to, I suppose. I think this is it. It surprised me when there was that rejection with Chelsea, but then he signed a new 4 or 5 year deal or whatever it was. Obviously, again, as a neutral, I'd like to see how far he can take Ipswich. But this is it. If he was to get a big job like an England or a United or a Spurs, McKenna, he needs that time to adjust to a bigger club's demand. And that's not a demise to Ipswich or anything like that, because it's a fantastic fairy tale story. But it's just, you can't give him just 6 months to hopefully that it makes an improvement. He needs a couple of years to get his projects across. And unfortunately, with the top flight teams, when it comes to, again, for Big Six again, and I suppose with England job in some degree, because we're wanting to win championships now and trophies and tournaments, that will he be able to cope with that pressure higher up in it with more expectations on his shoulders?
And I think that's the next step. And I think that's part of why he stayed at Ipswich, because he's very settled. He has an opportunity to stay with them, especially if they get relegated and they can try and rebuild and try and get them promoted the second time. And then they can identify whether it's worth keeping him after, maybe struggling after a second promotion. But I think he knew that it was too early for him. And I was really glad that he didn't make that jump so early, a bit like a Frank Lampard. And I think he sort of assessed that situation, that Lampard was in a good space with Derby, had a fantastic opportunity, which was obviously really difficult to turn down. But then he didn't have that success in a good reality, and look at sort of where his career is now. And it's not really projecting a lot of jobs out there at the moment for Lamps. But therefore, McKenna's gone, right, I can stay here at Ipswich. If I get sacked, I get a good payoff. At least I can say to the fans, look at the success I brought, look at the back-to-back promotions, look at what I tried to do in the Premier League. And at the moment, they're not struggling like Southampton are at the moment, or Wolves, or not even like a Crystal Palace at the moment. They're pinching crucial points, and they're points which are going to get them into a good position if they build on a few wins within that, and they keep doing that across the season, because Palace aren't doing very well at the moment. You've then got Southampton really struggling, Wolves are really struggling, and then there's teams like Leicester who are sort of borderline with Everton at the moment. So I think it's a very tough mix, but if he can just pick up a few points, a few wins, he could pull them into a good position by the end of the year.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a fantastic result for him against Villa on Sunday. That would probably springboard and make him push on a bit more. With McKenna, I think this is it though. It's a bit of a seesaw effect again, because you look at Rob Edwards. Everyone was praising what a fairly decent job he did with Luton last campaign, despite getting relegated. They were still in and around of getting, staying up. And it's only until this season that they've started in the Championship, and they're towards the bottom half of the Championship. All right, yeah, it's early days, but he was being mentioned with bigger jobs, wasn't he?
Absolutely, and I think again he's still within that mix somewhere along the line for other jobs that might come up, but it all depends on what he does in Luton, whether they stay down. But he was someone where a lot of accolades were coming his way and a lot of praise, but then they got relegated and they're back in the Championship. So I think it's good that Luton have stayed with him and he stayed with them, and it'd be interesting for the fight that they put up across the course of this season. But I think when it comes to entertaining thoughts around managers, I think it's just such an exciting prospect, as if we're sat in the boardroom and making decisions on what would happen to all these clubs. And I think that's where the key comes in if you're running a club, about identifying the right individual, as it is any organization. But, the fun of these sort of considerations of who you're going to appoint in these roles, I think is always an exciting prospect, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's encouraging for any up and coming coaches down for pyramids to get inspired by for likes of Kieran McKenna.
Well, just on the back of managers, right, mate, and it does link to Unai Emery in a perspective. So my boss is a big Villa fan, and he is a very much Villa through and through. And obviously tomorrow they're playing their Champions League game against Bayern Munich. Now, on the way out of work today, we were talking about that game, and I said, you know what, Vincent Kompany will be one of the most underappreciated, underrated appointments of a manager, because I've always said, despite what happened at Burnley and being relegated and whatever fans are saying, I think he's still a solid appointment as a manager, and he seems to be doing well at Bayern at the moment, and I really hope he does do well there. And I think the jury's still out, and I think there's a lot to perform at Bayern, but I think tomorrow is a big game between Villa and Bayern Munich. I think two managers against Unai Emery and Vincent Kompany are both going to be a good head-to-head game. So there's some real good games. Like even tonight, right? Salzburg just lost 4-0 to Brest, which I'm quite surprised at. So Salzburg is Pep Linder's team. They're doing quite well in the league. But you have Arsenal, PSG, Barcelona, Young Boys. Not a huge game, but the game is still on. Dortmund, Celtic, which I think is a decent shout of a game. You have Inter, Red Star, and then you've got AC Milan, Bayern Leverkusen, which I think is a decent game. PSV Sporting, which is not bad. And then you've got Man City playing Slovan Bratislava. So you look at that, Arsenal, PSG, Bayern, Dortmund, Celtic, Leverkusen, Milan. There's some decent games on tonight.
Yeah, there is. And I mean, there was a lot of talk about this Champions League format and it was going to work out, but I think it adds a bit more of a spice to it, a bit more of a competitive edge, actually.
I think for experienced foot manager players like us, this is a bit of a walk in the park because we've been expecting this change for some time, mate, and it makes no difference to us in that sort of transition because we've already been in that mind frame. And but it does, I think, when you look at sort of a league table format and you've got someone like Real Madrid who might finish, like, say, 10th, they still get seeded through and they play into the next round, but yet they didn't finish in, say, the top three. And therefore, you might go, right, the top three are going to win the Champions League. Well, actually, the team in 10th went on and won the Champions League. So I think that's how interesting it can open up and certainly play. And on the back of European competitions, I know Welsh clubs, Wrexham, Cardiff, Swansea, and Newport are all looking to enter in the Welsh Cup. And if they enter the Welsh Cup, they might get European seeding to play in these competitions. So a sort of fickle route for them, because if they do well in a Welsh Cup, then they're through to Europe, even though they finish much lower in the leagues than some Premier League teams who don't get European places. But that's what football can bring us. And I think that's where the sort of spice can come into it. So who knows, in a few years, mate, we could have Wrexham versus Dortmund in the Champions League, just like real life foot manager coming into play.
Yeah, no, that's mad, isn't it? And I was just getting that in my head. Newport against Real Madrid. I mean,
imagine the scenes, mate.
It would be crazy, wouldn't it? It would be really crazy. But I think this is it again. I mean, for that Welsh Cup, I think that's quite a decent idea because you'd say for Newport, or I suppose you could say even Wrexham, it's like their cup final against Cardiff anyway. So they'll be even more up for it anyway.
I think so as well, mate. So I think it'll be a huge decision. I think it's one that benefits Welsh clubs. Obviously puts other clubs like TNS, Cardiff Met at a bit of disadvantage. And it's one of those where you've got Welsh clubs who are playing in the English Pyramid, but then they want to go into the Welsh Cup because it's a benefit to them. So there's some little politics and intricacies surrounding these sort of movements in world football. But if they open up and you've got, someone like me who's not far, who's got Newport, Cardiff, Swansea, who are not majorly far, then if one of these qualifies for Europe, you haven't got a bad shout of games within a local facility. Because if every time TNS qualify, they're all the way up playing in Shrewsbury up in North Wales area.
Yeah, it puts teams on for map, doesn't it? And massively. I think with TNS as well, I mean, haven't they got Panathinaikos or someone like that, haven't they? And Fiorentina.
That's right, mate. So they qualified, and I think that's a great. I'd always love to go to TNS. They're like on one of my bucket sort of lists to watch. And I joined a Discord group, right, of Welsh football fans, and they're the kind of people who are your diehard Britain Ferry fans and Barry Town and Bangor City and all these types of places. So I joined it, and they said, "Oh, what team do you follow within the Welsh League?" And I was like, TNS, probably, because they're the ones I always select on Foot Manager. They're the ones I recognise the most. I'm not a huge fan. I don't support them like I support my other club. And I was like, but if I was to pick them and follow them, then that'd be the one I'd keep an eye out for. And oh, mate, the amount of abuse I got on the response to that didn't go down very well, because TNS are not a recognised Welsh team when it comes to playing in that league.
Oh, well, I didn't know that.
Well, originally, the TNS name, what do you know what that stands for, the original name?
For New Saints, isn't it?
It is the New Saints, but originally it was Total Network Solutions, because they were owned by a corporation, and they played out in England and operated in Wales, and then they merged into the Welsh League because of some movement, hence the rebrand the New Saints, and they merged with a Welsh club. So therefore, a lot of people identify them as an English club, not a Welsh club.
Oh, well, that's something that I've learnt new tonight. Thanks for that.
That's right, mate. The power of Football Manager leads you down to many late night reading sessions.
It certainly does. That's for sure. But yeah, what an exciting time for Welsh football, really.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. Well, on to sort of some of the back pages stuff. Over the last couple of weeks, we haven't had a pod, mate. So I've been accumulating, like I do, some of the things I see across social media, and touch on the back of former United, or around the topic of United. This player, he has recently signed for the UAE at a third-tier team called Precision FC. Now, this team sounds like a FIFA Ultimate Team that has been established, and he's one of your wildcard signings. But he's still out there. He's still playing football. He still exists. And Ravel Morrison.
Wow. That's all I've got to say is wow. That's crazy. I mean, he's still all right, we know about his attitude and that on and off the pitch, but he still can do a job in for Championship,
I
easy,
agree.
or bottom half Premier League. But to be like a third tier team over in UAE is like, whoa. It just amazes you how what drives people to drop down that low. Is it because that they really want to get back into it? Is it for passion, or is there other extrinsic motives out there? I don't know.
I think that's part of it. I think it's obviously money because UAE is usually a hot country and associated with money in some respect. And I think it's just a desire to play now at this point, especially on the back end of your career, knowing you don't have many opportunities left. But he sort of sits in that same boat as Jesse Lingard with that sort of forgotten football status, someone who could be doing a job for another club, someone who shouldn't be out playing in this kind of league, but yet is because no other club wants to touch them because of their attitude and previous experiences.
Yeah, I think it might put him back again. It's put him back on map. It might put his name back on map, and it will get that club's publicity up as well.
Mm.
He is a good on his day. He's a good player. I remember when he played against Spurs with West Ham, and he ran us ragged that game in that 3-0 defeat when we had AVB in charge. I think. Yeah, it's like wow. Yeah, it's the sort of thing you'd see on FIFA or Football Manager. This season is just strange on all accounts.
It's a very strange one. And just keeping within that United topic, mate, I read this on Instagram the other day. So we had Toni Kroos. Apparently, he was very close to joining United many years ago. And he was actually in talks with David Moyes about transferring from Bayern Munich across to United. And the stumbling block within that was when they sacked Moyes and they went on to appoint Louis Van Gaal, he then declined that decision. I was reading that and I was like, do you know what? It might usually be the other way around in those sort of conversations. People didn't mind the sign for Van Gaal, but they didn't want to sign for David Moyes as such.
Hmm.
And that's why Moyes ended up with players like Fellaini. And I thought there was such an interesting sort of move that never materialised.
Yeah, that could have helped on so many accounts. I mean, with David Moyes, again, we don't see what goes on behind the scenes between Louis Van Gaal and David Moyes. Say, but I've always heard that David Moyes is a brilliant man manager,
Mm.
and but Toni Kroos to United, I mean, wow, that would have been a brilliant signing. Um, Again, it got their reputation up again somewhat during that time.
I think so as well, mate. And I think it would have really helped them. But I think it's sort of a blessing in disguise for someone like Toni Kroos because he could have ended up being like Bastian Schweinsteiger V2, right? Where
Mm.
he went out to United, his career sort of plummeted, didn't then do well for Germany, and then his career didn't end on a real good note. And I think when you look at the end to Kroos's career, where he's still playing for Champions League, he's still playing in the World Cup, he's still playing for Real Madrid and his country, and yet he could still be selected now, but chose to retire. It sort of worked out a blessing in disguise by not joining United. So it's a funny way the world works at times, mate.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, with Louis Van Gaal's history in football compared to David Moyes at that time as well, it's
Mm.
and Fellaini, what a player! I always remember he used to be a thorn in the box when it comes to corners or whatever.
They had Fellaini and Wanyama, and I liked Wanyama, just a massive player who underperformed. They just had a list of players who, Morgan Schneiderlin, who
Yeah,
was not a bad player but didn't perform for United. And they just seemed to be a mix of different players who never got performing, but were actually decent at the original clubs they came from. A sort of bit like Richarlison, who's done well at Everton for years, and then goes to Spurs and doesn't really kill the world so much. But yet, it's that same sort of movement for those back then.
I think this is it though, is when maybe you're a big fish in a smaller pond, and that's no disrespect to the likes of Everton or um, Southampton with Schneidlin and so on and so forth. But when you come to a bigger club like United, I suppose again, the pressure's going to be on you, wanting to win trophies, compete for trophies, and then that big fish becomes like a little little fish in an even bigger pond.
Absolutely, mate. And that's what I was going to say to you. I remember even back then when Fellaini moved to United, a lot of people said, big fish in little pond, and that's lived with me ever since. And the fact that you said that, I think, just absolutely ascertains the fact that he was, and that's the sort of place it came out. But keeping on a sort of Bayern Munich topic now, mate, and transitioning nicely as it always does, here are some FIFA rating cards. So Jerome Boateng, who was class on FIFA back in the day, a part of that amazing Bayern squad that you would just use online every time, where you had your Iron Robbins, you had your Frank Ribery, you had your Boatengs, you had Manuel Neuer, you had Philip Lahm. The squad was an unbelievable squad to pick back then. And he was sort of in, as you always say, that ilk of player around then. And to still be playing his classmate, but the drop into a silver card from being a 90 rated player is always a sad moment for people like us who love FIFA and were prime spectators of these players back in the day, and just seeing a little decline on them is a little bit heartbreaking at the same time.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? I mean, what a career Boateng has had, but yeah. I mean, I've always wondered when it comes to these sort of ratings, how professional footballers actually take it as well. Do they laugh it off? Do they take it seriously? It'd be interesting, because
I think
after,
that
as you say, from that
I
drop
think
from
that
90 to 68.
massive drop, mate. And I think there was some videos years ago where I can't remember who, and they presented his card in front of him, and he went, "This is my pace rating," and he went nuts, mate. And I have to find that video, but I remember seeing that years ago. But that is a true sort of sad moment when you're no longer that player in 2017, but you're now the player in sort of the grey, slowing down a little bit, still still playing, but no longer that gold card. Where 41-year-old Pepe is still a gold card because look at his performances for Portugal, but you're just not there. And I think that's the very difficult time within our lives that we all sort of got to deal with at some point, and that's a very sad moment when it does happen.
Oh, absolutely. When you see your childhood heroes, yeah, and it's coming towards the end of their career. I always used to, it's really weird, I know, but I used to have dreams when I was younger thinking of all these players, and then it came to a situation that I was thinking, what if I don't know much about this player? What if I don't know about this player? I mean, really, before he joined Spurs, I'll take Mickey van der Ven as an example. I wouldn't have known he had pace like he's got until joining Spurs, Sorry, United fans. I'm digging at you this week, aren't I? But it's football's, yeah, it's evolved so much in a short space of time. And that's where it becomes, yeah, I suppose, like a lot for your head to get around, because I think you've put it before, Luca, is where when it comes to football, you could talk about everything and anything, and everything changes in a week or whatever. It's so universal; it can change so quickly, and that's why it's such a great thing to talk about, because it's yeah. There's so many exciting things that I reckon there's going to be something else come next week that would have been like, wow, didn't expect to see that from this week.
Well, on the back of that, that fits in really nicely, mate. And I'm glad that you sort of said that. We were transitioning nicely onto that, but you've just taken it into a perfect space now, right? Who you might be wowed by this, you might not be, right? Cristiano Ronaldo, 360 out of 368 players who played in the Euro Cup 2004 have already retired. Cristiano Ronaldo is that one who is still playing.
Wow. That's staggering.
What a stat, mind.
What a stat and what a fun, mate. Wow. But he doesn't look like he's aged at all, really, does he?
Not really, mate. He just looks like he's matured. He's had a bit of a haircut. He's had a couple of birthdays in between, but not aged as such. So, like a fine wine, as they say. But a lot of people criticise Saudi Arabia and his performances out there at times, but they won again the other day. He was on a score sheet with Mane. He's consistently playing, yet he doesn't have anything really to prove to himself. But I don't think he'll stop playing until Messi stops. I think when people go, right, you retired before Messi, there'll always be those questions. But I think his point is, I will keep going beyond Messi and I will keep scoring as long as Messi's retired, and I will do better than Messi. And I think his stats will prove that time and time again. And people can always argue, but when he's got more goals, more games, potentially more trophies, he's become, Al Nasser's top goal scorer of all time, and he's done that at the age of 40 plus. I think that's an incredible stat to have to go into a league like that, regardless of what anyone says, whether it's a farmers league or not. I just think this is an incredible stat in itself in terms of the testament of a professional and the top tier athlete he has always been.
Absolutely, and he still could do a job in top flight somewhere, I'm sure.
100% agree, mate.
And
100% agree.
That's it. Thing is, when you look at the likes of Messi and Ronaldo, again, it will be a sad day when they do retire. What we were saying just a second ago, because of what they've brought to the game and the amount of joy that they've brought to people's lives in their game-changing moments and their wonderful skills. But I can't see them going into management.
Mm.
I just don't think it'll be there. I think I could see Ronaldo would just be enjoying it more and he'll keep on doing his modelling.
I think it's interesting because he's always indicated that he's wanted to be a manager at some point. And again, it'd be interesting whether he does and whether he has some kind of success behind it. So I think that's the next sort of managerial player appointment to look at, because when you look at it now, you've got Vincent Kompany managing, you've got Xavi Alonso, you've got Simone Inzaghi, Nuri Sahin, Cesc Fabregas, Mikel Arteta, and these are just some of the Thiago Motta, Luis Enrique. They're all former players who are now managing and doing quite well at their respective clubs. But even the sort of younger names out of that who are recent appointments or have only been around for a few years, it's now sort of that category where everyone who was once a player when we were kids, mate, is now a manager. And that's the sort of scary thing because we're getting older with them. But it'd be interesting to see whether Ronaldo does become a manager and if he considers it.
Yeah, it would be interesting. But I mean, as well, when he does go into it, I mean, touch wood and everything like that with Fergie, not only live and everything, but what contact to have to get a bit of coaching advice off of, to get your feet into it and to speak. Yeah, to just get to know about the coaching side of thing, what contact to have.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. But we talk about longevity, right? So this is Kasper Schmeichel. He left Leicester after many, many years. He went out to Anderlecht out in Belgium. Didn't have a great success there. And after Joe Hart retired from Celtic, again, which we've spoken about before, and I can't understand why he would retire. But they went out and they purchased 38-year-old Kasper Schmeichel. A lot of people might question why would you even make that move, but Schmeichel's always been a class keeper, and I'm glad that he is at Celtic. I'm glad that he's playing Champions League again tonight. They've just gone 2-1 down in the Champions League, Celtic, unfortunately, to Dortmund, being managed by Nuri Sahin. But when you look at a player like him and the career he's had, I think he still attains legend status for Denmark. But he's broken an 118-year-old record, 6 consecutive clean sheets in the first 6 league games. And I think when you're 38 years of age, didn't work out Anderlecht, you've come back into the Scottish Premier League, and again, people might say Farmers League again, which I really hate, but he's broken a record that stood for 118 years. Why retire when you're still being picked for country, still #1 in the club, still playing Champions League, still competing for titles? I just don't understand why you'd retire when you're still having such sheer success.
No, I totally agree. And with Kasper Schmeichel, I mean, he worked with Brendan Rodgers at Leicester, I'm sure, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
So that's like a match made in heaven, really, in that respect. And I do feel that with that, like you say, I mean, people say Farmers League, I agree. It's not, because it's still competitive football, and if you can achieve that, even at that level, I say even at that level, what I'm trying to say is at any level of football, whether that be Scottish football, Premiership, Championship, League Two, even grassroots, if you can achieve that, it's some achievement.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. I think that's for me. When I think about success and high performers, it is about how much you can achieve as much as possible for as long as you can. But moving on to someone who might not be an acclaimed high achiever, right? Andy Carroll, 35 years of age, signed for Bordeaux recently. He's come out to say he's only earning 3.5k per week or whatever it is, right? And it's actually costing him to play football, which I'm very much interested to understand how it's costing him to play football, just to break down in the detail of it, right? But he's 35 years of age. He's still going. He's decided to recently move from one club in France back to Bordeaux, where they've been massively struggling. So actually not a bad coup for them. He's actually not in bad form at the moment. But again, someone who's always been affected by injury and who we might have expected to retire at 31, 32, 33, seems to have that interest and wants to keep pushing, is scoring, is in some good form at the moment. So definitely catching a bit of the eye on social media, I believe, at the moment.
Yeah, and it's good to see that he's started off well with Bordeaux. I mean, he still looks in peak condition there, really. I mean, I know he had his injury problems as a player, but he looks quite in a good physique there, and I think that's a bit of a smart move from Bordeaux. And it'll be interesting to see where it takes him with that. Will that might inspire Wrexham to be their next signing?
Yeah, he might do all right for Wrexham just as a backup rotation striker, mate. You never know. Even if it's for 6 months to a year, it might actually, cast some eyes towards Wrexham. And that's the kind of moves where even if you go out and get a 36, 37-year-old, he still has a sort of name around him. And they will still attract some demographic of people to take interest in those sort of movements. And I think that's the interesting thing in football. But this was one that I was interested in reading the other day, right? And I thought of this and I thought of you straight away. Not only because you look a little bit like him, right, mate? But the next potential move in world football on the managerial stage.
Oh,
I don't think that's a bad appointment.
no, I don't either. I think that's quite smart.
Again, someone who hasn't really been tested at managerial level, someone who's never really had the chance to progress or manage a club. He's 47 now, where obviously that still makes no difference over anything. But since he's been retired for now 9 years, he's been in charge of the Real Madrid B team for 5 years now. And that sort of makes you think, why hasn't he sort of progressed like, Xavi Alonso has, from a youth team up to a senior team? But obviously he loves Real Madrid and has been with them since 2018. So he's obviously settled in life and he's happy to be back there. He's doing quite well with the B team. He got promoted from the youth team. And his record actually isn't too bad in charge. And when you sort of look at internal appointments with Zidane, who came from the Castilla, which is the B team, and took charge of that Real, I think Raul is sort of waiting for that kind of move. But if he was to take over Leverkusen, I think that would be a great shout and a very interesting move for them if Xavi Alonso does move on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it sets the precedent of what Leverkusen are trying to achieve with their managerial appointments. Sorry, and that's smart. And I can see him going there, and I can see him doing well. I think it's like, again, Xavi Alonso has set the tone there, and because he's made that stamp now, it's putting again Leverkusen on the map and getting them out there and recognised and everything like that. And it'd be interesting to see how they get on in Europe this season, as well as their Bundesliga.
Absolutely, mate.
Adventures.
And just on the back of that, Leverkusen just took the lead against AC Milan, but has been rolled off for offside there. But I think it's definitely an interesting time to watch Leverkusen and how they perform. And I think they sort of sit in that category for me, where it is interesting to keep up with results like Como and how they do under Cesc Fabregas out in the Serie A, and how they perform, because they picked up some recent form recently, and they're not doing too badly. But this one, mate, a player coming out of retirement, maybe.
Adriano. Wow. Legend.
Not so much of a complete return to football, but a farewell game in December where he will play for Flamengo and Inter Milan. I believe he'll switch at half time and play a half for each team, which I think is going to be fascinating to see and whether he can last 90 minutes. But someone who should have had a much greater career than he did. And it's such a shame that he sits in that category of footballers who never made it to their true potential. But what a quality player he was back in the day. And I remember many years ago, I was at my granddad's once on a Sunday morning, so I stay over every weekend. And MSN News would be on, and I'd flick through and I'd read the news. And this was when City first got taken over by the Saudis, right? And they were signing everyone you can sort of think of at that time. And I remember they were linked for a move for Brazilian Ronaldo. And I remember my granddad going, really? And I was like, yeah, that'd be class to see Brazilian Ronaldo in a City shirt, even for a year. Like, if you're a City fan at that time and you've got that shirt in your collection, that is one to have in your collection.
Absolutely, yeah. I love that. Yeah. He's I think that's a great thing as well, that maybe more players should do that anyway, a farewell game, because it gives people the opportunity to go and watch and thank them for the memories that they've created, I suppose. And to do half each for each team is really good as well. I think that's a nice incentive as well.
Absolutely, mate. And I think that's the interesting thing is what the players do after they retire, where they've gone on and done things. And it's sort of you search on Google, what are these players doing now? And sometimes you don't always get the answers. But the other week I was watching the overlap and I was reading some of the comments and some of the requests and names coming on there. And one of the people that requested to go on there was Mark Viduka. Now, Mark Viduka is a bit of a throwback name, playing for Newcastle mostly, as I recall him in the Premier League. And someone said it'd be nice to have him on to know what he's done in football, because since he's retired, he's sort of dropped off. Now, only the other day I was flicking through social media and this came up and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like someone else's answer that they might not have seen, right? And I thought, you know what, it might even be interesting to share it tonight. So Mark Viduka, now only age 48, started off at Dynamo Zagreb, played for Celtic, Middlesbrough and Newcastle, making 133 appearances for Leeds, scoring 59 goals. 4 goals against Liverpool will live in memory. He now owns a coffee shop and is retired out in Croatia.
Different career path completely.
A very different career path. An Australian retired out in Croatia is a very sort of touching move about how people can go around the world and where they might end up and what they might be doing, and then owning a coffee shop within that mix, especially on the back of Premier League and international football and where you end up. But Croatia is a beautiful country, I hear, but it's always sort of touching to see these players who were once on the world stage and under press and speculation to just be casually living a life after many years.
Yeah, it's very refreshing, isn't it? And can you imagine though, if we gone over there and we was like, oh, Mark Viduka, you've got a coffee shop. Like, you know, one latte, please. You know, it's really refreshing. And there's some players that you see that are trying to get away from football. Like, maybe that's what Viduka's doing, I don't know. But as you say, it's definitely nice to see. And it sort of makes you think, and it brings again back in my mind all the memories, you know.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. Especially on the great days of Premier League football, which we can recall. And that awesome Newcastle kit, which I always loved back in 2008. But this was one that I saw following Pochettino's appointment at the US national team. So you look at his accomplishments, right? Led Southampton to their best league finish in 10 years. Again, these are all good accomplishments to have and the impact that you have at these clubs. EFL runners-up with Spurs. Spurs second place to the best finish since 1962-63. Champions League final with Spurs. Well, there's a running theme there that Spurs are just runners-up and never clinical winners. He then went on to win the League One and Coupe de France out in PSG. And then he reached 6th in the Carabao Cup final with Chelsea. And one of the comments which I read underneath was, well, where's all the trophies? Well, you manage Spurs, so there's your answer.
Shots fired. Yeah, he's got the Spurs curse, unfortunately, isn't he?
That's it, mate. He's taking them with them. He was the perfect appointment always.
Yeah, that's what happens when you work with Daniel Levy, I suppose.
Oof.
um, yeah, I've had time to digest that appointment. I think again, it's going back to that point what I was saying a minute ago. Again, it's putting America on for map or USA on for map. And I think it might make me a bit more intrigued to see how USA could get on and in for World Cup if those could be in it and everything like that. How they get on, and it's again quite refreshing. But it's make or break for Poch. I think if it goes well, great. But if it goes wrong, that could be the end of his managerial career so early on.
Absolutely, and I think I'm not a huge Posh fan, but I've always been interested in the US national team and their performances, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how he gets them performing, and especially on a national stage, and whether they compete or whether they flop within a national scene. Because we've seen managers like Martinez go on and manage Belgium and now Portugal, being Spanish himself, and perhaps not getting them to the levels they need to be at. And even when we've had managers like Capello and maybe a touch of Sven Goran Eriksson in England, a lot of people say when you get foreign appointments to a national team and they don't have success, it's never a real good workout when that sort of comes around. And same for Bert. I don't know how you pronounce his second name, but he was in charge of the Netherlands. I believe he went on and won the Euros with Ian Robben and that squad back in the day, right? And he got appointed Austria manager or Australia. It was Australia. And he absolutely flopped with them, and he never managed ever since. So I think it's the same sort of cut of the cloth when it comes to these sort of movements for Pochettino to perform, because he's going to be ridiculed and under great scrutiny on the world stage in a World Cup, for example.
Absolutely, be fascinating, and it's like what we're saying with that Steve McLaren appointment for Jamaica. You know, we're seeing football all different angles this season, and I think with management, what we said before, when you're in it, you need it out of it because you need a break. When you're out of it, it's like, oh, I need to be back involved. You get that bug, and I can only assume that's happened. What's happened with Poch, in a sense, for him to think with USA position. Although it could, again, if he leaves a legacy behind it, even if they don't be successful, should we say, if he leaves a legacy behind, though, to put America on for map or USA on for map, it's in younger players and everything like that. You know, people like that, you know, Americans and United States of America will be very grateful for that in years to come, because they'll look back at that. We could be looking back at it in about 20 years' time or whatever and say, well, he's left his mark there on for USA job, you know, for past, because someone else has gone in there now and they've achieved good things from what he built on there. But I mean, wasn't it didn't Jurgen Klinsmann run for USA job once?
Yes, he had it for a period of time, and he actually done okay in charge of the team, I thought, personally.
Yeah. So we shall see. I mean, that's exciting. I can't wait until the next World Cup. But to be fair, the last World Cup I enjoyed watching. I felt the Euros was a bit flat. Apart from like Spain, obviously, that was just phenomenal. But I just felt a bit of Euros was flat. But when the World Cup returns, it's going to be really good, because again, it's over USA, Canada, and Mexico, isn't it?
That's it, mate. And I think that'd be very interesting to see the plight of games across those three countries. But for me, I haven't had a tournament capture me since the World Cup 2010 Africa. That was just the class, vuvuzelas, and just the buzz from the moment it kicked off, and the players remember the goals that were scored, and just the atmosphere from that time. For me, I've never really recaptured that since 2010.
That's true. Yeah, vuvuzelas. Where are they now? Can you still get them?
I'm not sure, mate, but I think I've got one still from back then.
Have you?
Yes, I think I've still got one up in the attic somewhere in a box. But yes, I remember my mate buying me one, and I kept it ever since. So I think I've still got it.
You might have to bring it out one episode. No pressure.
Yes, that could be the opening theme song, bit like Match of the Day, mate.
Yeah, try Match of the Day theme on VVZ. There you go.
Yeah, we'll see, mate. We'll see. We could create our own band at this rate. Okay, so my last bit of social media news.
Yeah.
Victor Moses to Luton.
To be fair, when I had him score against Plymouth the other night, I was thinking, no, that can't be right. But it was right. I mean, that's a great move for Luton. He's still got tons of quality and potential. When I say potential, ability, that's the word I was after. And his experience will definitely help the Luton squad galvanise, hopefully, their league positions get back up again. That's the sort of player that they need if they want to get back in the top flight again, first time asking. That's who they need. And I remember his days at Chelsea with Conte as a wing back.
He was class, mate. Someone massively underrated who didn't have quite enough of a good Chelsea career because of the change of managers and how the clear succession, which really hampered his career.
Yeah, I had a soft spot for Victor Moses, even when he was he at Wigan, weren't he?
Yes, that's where he came from, mate.
Yeah, so even had a soft spot for him at Wigan, really. And yeah, it just was another level at Chelsea at wing back with Conte. I mean, wow. I suppose when there was that comparison when I think he must have been there when Conte was there when we had Matt Doherty, and I was really hoping that Matt Doherty could have had what Victor Moses had at Chelsea with Conte, but it just didn't work out.
And it's a shame that it didn't work out, but he won't be out of Victor Moses, mate. And obviously that's why Spurs are there, because they're a B team Chelsea, mate, and they just don't touch us on that surface. So that's why he didn't perform, mate.
Definitely not. But I think Victor Moses, yeah, great signing for Luton, and that's sort. Yeah, I can see that being a really good person to have in the dressing room.
A good signing, especially on a free, even if it's till the end of the season, just for that experience. And it's good to see sort of player like that to still have these moments and still want to capture on to playing football, which we have said, or you have said earlier on in this episode, mate. So we sort of hit the concluding part of our episode, but we've got the activity which you introduced. Now, I'm not sure if you've prepared anything for this week, and if you haven't, I have. And I've looked forward to doing this because the moment that we finished our episode the other week when you introduced this, I was really excited and I put in some players in and around this. So, George, not sure if you've got anything, mate, that you want to pull up or whether you've got forgotten footballers.
I haven't this week, but I will for next week.
That's not a problem, mate, because we will go through and it's your turn to sit on the hot spot, mate. Okay?
No pressure.
No pressure at all. So I've selected 10 players only this week, and it'll be cool if you get 10 out of 10, but we'll see how well you go.
Okay.
Well, good luck, mate.
Thank you.
First player.
Stuart Downing?
That's correct, mate.
Downing. Now, he had a peg on him, didn't he? I mean, with that, wasn't he called into the England squad a few times as well?
He was. He sort of had that sort of David Bentley sort of feel about him, but never quite good.
That's right. I remember even again back on Football Manager days when he wasn't around for England squad that I kept calling him up because I wanted a set piece for it. So yeah, good memories.
And I was going to say the same, mate. He was someone that I would have and be that sort of call up back in the day because he wasn't a bad player, but he had 35 caps, remember, for England, which is much more than I ever recall him having. But he was consistent in that England squad at the time. He went on and played for Liverpool, didn't do quite so well there, went on to West Ham, went back to Middlesbrough and done quite well. So he had an okay career considering he had 597 league games, so pretty solid in all fairness. 722 games in total. Not a bad player in his career in reality.
No, absolutely not. What's he doing now, I wonder? He's not in coaching, is he?
Not that I'm aware of, mate. So again, it's one of those questions where what are these players doing after they retire, which I think is always an interesting one.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be interesting to see where maybe he's got a coffee shop somewhere.
Possibly, mate, in Middlesbrough, unfortunately for him, probably.
Yeah, taking inspiration from Viduka, though.
That's it, mate. Okay, next one.
Oh, I think it's on too much. Mm. Mate, why did I think it began with P?
No P in there, mate. No P.
No P. Can you give me first letter of what it begins with?
Yeah, of
Or is
course,
that
mate.
cheating?
Starts with M. He was part of that
Melchior.
Wigan squad. Yes, Mario Melchior. Part of that Wigan squad with Zaki and Mario Melchior and Antonio Valencia and Victor Moses. So a good squad that we saw. So I always liked Mario Melchior. He had a pretty cool name, so I tended to assign him on Foot Manager quite a few times.
You and me both. But Mario Melchior, I mean, I remember him more, obviously, when you said Wigan, yeah. But I always remembered his Chelsea days more than his Wigan days, even
Ooh,
though there was
interesting that.
Wigan, you know.
Interesting that, mate. Okay, next one.
Oh, was he Brazilian?
He was. You're on the right lines.
Oh, I used to love him, I think, as a player because he was an absolute baller. And he had a good shot on him, didn't he?
That's right, mate. He did indeed.
Elano?
Elano is correct, mate. What a great throwback and certainly recollection of him. Good player. Came in, was part of that City squad before it all changed when they had the Saudis invest, and again, someone had a bit of an underrated career as a result. But good player, yeah, good throwback.
Wasn't Elano part of City's side that when Sven was in charge of City as well?
He was one of the clinical players at City under Sven and had a good time under him and really prospered. Just it didn't work out when that ownership changed, and he was one of the first players to go, unfortunately, and didn't fit Mark Hughes' plans.
Mind you, when you think of it, when they've had, if you go through for stages here, so they've had Elano, then they've gone from Elano to David Silva, then they've gone from David Silva to like De Bruyne. I mean, they've got an eye for pretty talented, creative players, haven't they, City, really?
And what a sort of succession as well for these players, which City have signed over the years. It's just that you might consider yourself very unfortunate that you weren't the sort of KDB of the modern era where you could have been a lot more successful than you had been. So some of the tough parts of football, I suppose, at times, but still had part of that Saudi sort of story which he can lay claim to.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, the next player, Jord, also sat in that City squad.
Oh, I recognise him. So same time. He was Brazilian as well, weren't he?
English.
Oh, first person that was coming to my mind was Rubino.
Ooh, close, but not Rubino.
Is he a pundit now?
He is for City, yes.
Nader Manua?
That's right, mate. Great collection. Great
Yeah.
collection. Very underrated, forgotten player who never really reached the stars, but sort of goes under the radar. And he was one of the first players I thought of when you suggested this activity of forgotten players. He fits right into the top category of that for me.
Yeah, he's wow, I forgot that. Again, I don't really remember him of City days, but I remember him when he was part of the QPR side when they had a lot of money.
That's right, mate. And they went out and they signed quite a few different players, Sean Wright-Phillips, Rio Ferdinand, and they just spent a lot of money very quickly and had a lot of players under Harry Redknapp, and that was an interesting time for QPR.
Quite a solid centre half though in his day, weren't he?
He wasn't too bad, mate. He wasn't too bad. It was just a shame his career never worked out. And again, he was part of that Saudi takeover and his career moved on and it just never really worked out for him.
Did he get any England caps?
I'd have to double check that right now.
Because I can't recall him getting an England cap. No.
I think no, he only played for the youth teams, and then he went out and played in America for a couple of years, and he's been retired ever since. So he's been retired 4 years, retired at 33. He works for City in content and doing punditry. So bit of a shame, really. And I think he was also linked with being called up to Nigeria, and that never materialised. So someone who had, again, a bit of a misfortune in his career, but one where you can look back and played 427 games overall, played in the European Championships for England, won the playoffs with QPR, played for City, part of that Saudi sort of takeover, now works for City. So not a bad career.
No, but isn't it crazy that you've had 427 appearances in your club career and you don't get a cap for your country?
At least one, I know, considering some of the players we have capped for England, mind.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. Next one.
Oh, again, he looks very familiar. Now, that was a legendary kit of Newcastle's.
I loved that one. I loved it, mate.
Was he a left back?
He was a striker.
Striker? I was thinking of Jose Enrique to start with. It's definitely not him then.
No, not Jose Enrique.
Oh. Striker. I think I do recognise him, but I'll have to pass.
Oh, interesting that, mate. I remember him more from his Cardiff City days. Michael Shopra.
I'll see myself out. Well, yeah. Cardiff days at Michael Chopper, yeah, because he was at Sunderland as well, wasn't he?
That's right, mate. I always remember him doing the one where he scored a goal and he took his boot off and had some kind of celebration. But yes, Michael Shopra, definitely remember him from his Cardiff days, mate.
Yeah, he scored quite a few goals for Cardiff as well, didn't he? If I remember
Not
right.
a bad career. He was in great form when he played for Cardiff.
Yeah, but then, so if he was at Sunderland, wasn't he at Middlesbrough as well?
I believe so. That was one of his clubs. Yeah, he was around a few different clubs. So, yeah, he was not a bad player, Michael Shopra.
Cool. Can you imagine being on that pitch if he was playing for one of them three clubs and then you knew, well, as a supporter, you knew you played for one of your other clubs that was a rival?
I know, mate. It doesn't tend to go down quite well in your career when those sort of things happen. Just having a quick look at his career, he actually never played for Middlesbrough, quite surprisingly. He played for Newcastle, Watford, Nottingham Forest, Barnsley, Cardiff, Sunderland. Went back to Cardiff twice, then signed for them permanently. Played for Ipswich, Blackpool, went out to Kerala Blasters, went to Alloa Athletic, the Kerala Blasters, and then signed for West Allotment Celtic, which actually play their home games near Newcastle and are quite far down on the pyramid. Yeah, never played for Middlesbrough, which I actually thought he did. We must be recalling someone else in that.
Yeah. That's an interesting career as well, from where it started to where it ended.
Absolutely, mate. Played for England under 16s, 17s, 19s, and 20s. So, again, as someone who never just picked up a cap, which is a little bit of a shame because, he might have done okay for us. But sort of when you look at our strikers and you look at Crouches, your Defoes, your Bench, your Wayne Rooney's, and the other strikers we had in that long list, I think it was always going to be very difficult for him to try and secure one of those caps. So, perhaps never considered and maybe in the right reasons, but we will never know. Next player.
Shane Given.
I knew this would be a straightforward, easy one for you, mate. Part of that Newcastle squad, part of someone who went into City and got replaced because of Roberto Mancini coming in. Didn't impress Roberto Mancini, and therefore Joe Hart got recalled. And that's how Joe Hart came to be number one. But not a bad keeper, Shay Given. Should never have left Newcastle, in my opinion. But when you're being offered big money to go and compete for perhaps Premier League, top European football, when the Saudis came in back then, you're not going to say no back in that time period.
No, absolutely. And yeah, I've really liked Shay Given as a keeper. He was one of my favourite keepers of that era, if you like, in the Premiership when he was at Newcastle. That is.
He sort of sits in that era of keeper where I recall a young Scott Carson being out on loan to Aston Villa, and you have Brad Friedel playing for Blackburn Rovers in that iconic kit. Edwin van der Sar, Petr Cech, Jens Lehmann, and Almunia, and those sort of goalkeepers being around, and
Paul
just
Robinson as well, wasn't there?
Oh yes, Paul Robinson for Blackburn and Spurs when he was out there, and that goal he scored from his own net. I very mixed views on Paul Robinson, the keeper. I thought he was okay, but in realistic terms, a lot of people said he was tragically bad. But he was okay.
Yeah, it wasn't consistent enough, I think. That's what frustrated me as a young Spurs fan then. But it was quite as you say, when he scored that goal over Ben Foster, when Ben Foster was looking to get the England team around him.
That's it, mate. Next one.
Goalkeeper again.
That's right, yeah. Someone who went on to have a very underrated career, being part of our very long list of players, which we accumulated, and went out on multiple loans and slowed down his career. And it was a big shame for him, realistically. And his career never really got going.
Ross Turnbull?
Correct, mate. Correct. Only played 148 games in his career. He signed for Chelsea in 2009, was there for 4 years, and only played a total of 7 games within a 4-year period, leaving Middlesbrough, where he had done okay and went out for multiple loans, but played for England under 16s to 19s, and just perhaps a very underrated career. But when you look at the players where he shared some time at Chelsea, they're sort of good experiences you can never really replicate, and he can sort of be proud of despite the lack of games in his career.
But yeah, 148 games in his career.
A very, very low amount. That's just league games, mind, in terms of what he played, but total 174, which is very little.
That is very, very little for someone of his potential that he had. Yeah, wow.
Well, he had a 13-year professional career. So, you know, if you look at the averages of 174 games divided by 13, the outcome on that is very, very low. And it's such a shame when you see these sort of players have that kind of career, because over 13 years professional football, he averaged only 13 games per year. And then you look at that percentage-wise out of the available games, it's a very sad sort of career which he had. And a great shame he didn't have more games.
Yeah, totally agree.
Next one, George.
Oh my God. Again, I recognise him. Newcastle keeper. Was he back up to Shay Gibbon?
He was.
By any chance? Now then. Cast. Going into a trance of mindfulness for a second. Oh my God. Was he English?
He was, yes, English.
Did he make any caps for England?
Never played for England.
Would you have said he could play for England though? If he...
I think he would have done okay as maybe a rotation keeper for us. Surprised he never even got a cap in a friendly, considering, you know, we had Paul Robinson, Calamity James back then. You know, we had Scott Carson coming in and out the squad. We had a young Ben Foster. We had a young Rob Green, and the type of keepers that we had. I'm surprised he never at least got one cap.
Ooh. I know I'm going to kick myself. I'm sure. Pass.
Steve Harper.
Yes.
Steve Harper, mate. Had 157 games in 20 years for Newcastle, which is, again, very, very low. 237 games in his career. He went out on multiple loans up until 2011, where then he went on and played for Hull City for 2 years before signing for Sunderland and then retiring. Again, another very underappreciated, a very sort of forgotten player who had some games within the Premier League and had a good run at one point for Newcastle and got replaced by Shea Given. But I always remember him being on FIFA back in the day and always being part of that Newcastle squad when we will pick teams to manage, for example. But, 2006 was when he got 25 games in the league, 21 a year after, 16. Then he had a year in the Championship playing 45, came back to Premier League, played 18, and then he dropped for a year with nothing. Then he played 9 games, and it just wasn't a great sort of time. He went up and then sort of went down on his statistics for Newcastle, which is a shame.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm just trying to think because I can't remember what year it was, mind, but I remember that I went to a Spurs game with my granddad at the old White Hart Lane, and it was either Shay Given or Steve Harper was in goal, and they just had a blinding game. They frustrated us all game because they make good saves for us. Oh.
We'll have to work out which keeper that was, whether it was Given or Harper, mate.
Yeah, I'll let you know next week.
Definitely, mate.
I've got
Well,
the program somewhere, I think.
I was just about to say to you, that might be a good thing to go and look at, whether you've got one laying about somewhere. So interesting, mate. I look forward to hearing that one.
Football programs, that's another topic for another week.
Oh, mate, I had so many at one point. I actually had to sell multiple programs a couple of years ago because I was literally just like, when I am even going to read some of these? But yes,
Yeah.
definitely interesting. We'll have to do that as well at some point. You pick out a selection of some of your favorite programs, and I'll see whether I've kept a few which have had some sentiment to me. Okay, number 9.
Again, I recognise him. Was he French?
I believe he had French descent, yes, but never played for France. He went on and played for an African country.
Julian Faber?
No, mate. Good shout, but no.
And that's probably why I recognise him, because of being in a West Ham shirt. It's like he's sort of celebrating that I'm not getting his name. Jeez almighty. Are you able to give me a clue?
He was recently employed by Fulham as an assistant manager, and he's not long left to become a senior national team manager.
Louis. It'll come to me. It's a double name, wasn't it?
That's right, man. Yeah.
Part of Marco Silva's coaching team.
That's right. Yeah.
Louis Van Gaal.
That's right, mate. Yes. Good. And then on to our final one.
Titus Bramble.
Titus Bramble. What a player. What a name. Part of that Wigan squad as well.
I remember, again, every time I used to play Football Manager, if I was, say, doing a Wigan or Sunderland, he always used to get like a 6.2 rating or something like that.
Bang average, mate. Bang average.
Yeah, but didn't he get booked a lot as well and everything like that, I think, didn't he?
Yes, I believe so. Part of that squad, which had a very up and down time, but one of the average players of the Premier League as such, but will always stand out in some capacity to some people like us because of his either bad performances on Football Manager, picking up many cards in real life, or just having a pretty cool name, I suppose, Titus Bramble.
Yeah. Bramble pie.
Bramble pie, mate. But
Yeah.
mate, you've done well on that activity. Only a couple which you didn't get, but solid shouts and a throwback to sort of 2008, 2009, 2010, around that sort of era of footballer. And it's very interesting when you start looking at different names and squads. Even you start recording yourself. Oh my gosh, how did I forget all about this player? And even got to a point where I'm going to have to start considering going up in the attic and getting out some old match attacks folders that I've got up there and start rekindling some of my thoughts around it, mate. But well done, good round, very good introduction of football knowledge by Jordan. You should always host a quiz soon, and I'll have to get someone to come up against you where I've got some thoughts about that, which I'm going to catch up with you soon about. I just need to secure the other guest who is coming on, but some very exciting times ahead, mate. But this is the 6th episode of season 2, so we're in a good place with it. And there's definitely been some times to keep on top of, to keep considering. Right now, Arsenal leading PSG 2-0, Barcelona 3-0 up. Dortmund are 5-1 up at Celtic, which is now a great shame since seeing that. Inter are 1-0 up. Leverkusen now with AC Milan. PSV 1-0 Sporting, and City are 2-0 up. Newcastle are 1-0 up against Wimbledon in the Cup. And just to touch upon some other scores, Burnley are beating Plymouth 1-0. Blackburn are 2-0 down to Coventry. Sunderland are 1-0 against Derby. Middlesbrough West Brom 0-0. Birmingham Huddersfield 0-0. Charlton, we're losing 1-0 to Bristol Rovers. They've dropped some form recently, Charlton, which is a great shame to sort of see. Mansfield 1-0 Crawley. Wrexham are 1-0 down to Stevenage. Wigan are 2-0 up against Peterborough. Cheltenham are 1-0 down to Accrington. And Newport are winning 2-0, whilst Tranmere and Swindon are drawing 1-1. So a very mixed array of results, and Newport are beating Salford, where I always take some little bit of interest in Salford, just because of their ownership and who is in charge over there. But mate, some good results up and down the table. The amount that I have little gold stars next to because I've had the monitor of the games going on. But mate, a solid episode, and I appreciate your time as always.
Yeah, thank you very much, Luke. I enjoyed that in segment 2. Enjoyed the pod with you. Always great spending time with you and talking about something that we love so much.
Always, mate, absolutely. Well, that is episode 6 of season 2.